This is the Nederlandse Spoorwegen number 3737. Though, to many people, she isn't a number. Despite there being no nameplate in sight, she has a name alright. To many, she is Jumbo. Jumbo is the largest purebred Dutch express locomotive. She is the only preserved NS 460, and she had the honour of being the last steam locomotive in revenue-earning service in the country. The style of smokebox and the splashers reveal she was built by Bayer Peacock of Manchester in 1910, deliberately styled after a contemporary English express locomotive. I had always assumed she was inspired by the Great Western Railway's Star class of 1906. Jumbo was built by the Staatsspoorwegen, or State Railways in the Netherlands. This company, as far as I can tell, didn't classify their locos in a conventional way, they just referred to their locos by their running numbers. The name Jumbo caught on for the class because they were just so big. Jumbos had 4 cylinders driven by Wolsgaard's valve gear and a working pressure of 170 psi. That being said, they were built reactionary to another Dutch railway company's big express loco, the Noord Brabantsch Duitsche Spoorweg's 2C engines from 1908. The MBDS's name stands for North Brabantian German Railways, and 2C refers to the wheel arrangement, 2 leading axles and 3 powered ones, thus the third letter of the alphabet. The driven wheels were 6 foot 6 inch in diameter. These handsome engines are known, in Dutch, as mail engines, that is, mail, M-A-I-L, the English word. For that was their purpose. They would take over mail trains from the port of Vlissingen at Boxtel, which they then hauled to Wesel in Germany. Other than mail engines, their imposing outline and blue livery gave them the nickname of Blauwe Brabanders, or Blue Brabantians in English, though the name could also be a reference to Brabantian horses, which are quite big. When the NS was formed in 1920, the Brabantians became the class 3500, and the Jumbos the class 3700. Now obviously the class 3700 is more powerful than the 3500, it has double the amount of cylinders, but I do think it is commendable just how much of a success they were. The 3700s became the locomotive for NS, to the extent that the NS built even more examples of the class to a total of 120 Jumbos, meaning the final members of the 3700 class were in fact numbered 3800. And all because a small line in Brabant was the first line in the country to run their own 460 locomotives. I always end up feeling a bit sorry for locomotives which inspired other types, only to be surpassed by the very same engines they inspired. When I took to researching the Blauwe Brabanders, I found something interesting. Apparently, the 3500 design was, at least partially, attributed to John George Robinson. Now, to Dutch enthusiasts who happen to be watching, that name might not mean much, but to people familiar with British locomotive designs, that name has significance. G.J. Robinson was the chief mechanical engineer of the Great Central Railway. A passage in the book Treindesign by Heleen, Vieveen and Henk Sijsling, when translated to English, states the following. The NBDS was the first company to take the leap to acquire a machine of such power. The design of the locomotive was by the builder, Bayer Peacock and Company. A few years beforehand, a similar series was built for the Great Central Railway to the design of engineer Robinson. So basically, a Great Central Railway locomotive designed by Robinson was the inspiration for the Brabanders, and with them, both the SS and Nederlandse Centraal Spoorweg locos copying them. You might wonder why that is so significant. Many locomotives around the world are inspired by British designs, you might say. Well, you have to keep in mind what kind of a company the GCR was. It crossed mountains, ducked and climbed away from roads and other railway lines to avoid having to build crossings. It even had aspirations to connect to France via a speculative tunnel which was to link Britain to the European continent. And this company was inspiring a line which just crossed level bogs and sandplains. It's just so bonkers, I love it. So then a question presents itself. Which GCR locomotive actually was the inspiration for the Dutch 460s? Now, Robinson actually designed 9 classes of 460 for the GCR, but with the context we have, we can whittle that down to just 4. If the locomotive in question was built after 1908 when the Brabanders appeared, it's impossible for them to have been the influence. Nor do I think a 4-cylinder machine could reasonably be the engine we're looking for, as the 3500s only have 2 inside cylinders. This leaves us with the following Great Central machines. The classes 8, 8C, 8F, and 8G. The Class 8 was the first of the Robinson 460s, as the name being just a number with no subdivision indicates. In 1902, the concept of a 460 was relatively new to Britain, and 6 years prior, it was a wheel arrangement mostly associated with freight locomotives. Heavy freight generally didn't have to go fast, but obvious exceptions were mail, meat, and fish. The Class 8 became such a regular performance on the Grimsby fish trains that the class became known as fish engines. 14 were built, 8 of which by Bayer Peacock. The 8Cs from 1903 were just 2 purely passenger engines. Their construction was driven by research, as by then it was not sure whether the 442 or 460 wheel arrangements were the more suitable ones for the Great Central's London expresses. As it happened, they actually went with 440s, but that's another story. The two locomotives were identical save for their cylinders. Those of number 195 were 19.5 inches in diameter, whilst 196 had just 19 bore. Both 195 and 196 were products of Bayer Peacock. Being just two locomotives, the Class 8C were well received, but evidently not in themselves worth perpetuating. Instead, the Great Central had Bayer Peacock build 10 of the new Class 8F in 1906. Essentially just a more powerful version of the 8C, the 8F also found work on the Grimsby perishable freight trains. The class were known as the Imminghams in service. They were less powerful than the Class 8, but with their larger 6'7" driving wheels, they were, in theory at least, faster. The 8Gs, meanwhile, had 5'3" wheels, the smallest of all the candidates. They were simple yet very reliable mixed traffic machines. They were built as soon as Bayer Peacock had finished building the 8Fs. As far as locomotives go, the 8Gs were meh. Although well received by crews, it became apparent that the 9J could do anything an 8G could. For a 460, this is not only humiliating because the 9Js had smaller wheels, but also because they were 060s. The quintessential Victorian and Edwardian locomotives for slow freight. Actually, the 9Js were surprisingly speedy, even being clocked at 60 miles an hour, making them only just slower than the NS 3500s. This has nothing to do with finding out which GCR locomotives inspired those engines, I just thought it was funny. On the surface, none of this makes it any easier to actually find the inspiration for the Brabanders. Nowhere in the book do Vieveen and Sijsling elaborate on which locomotive designed by Robinson it was, so on my end, all I can do is guess. I think we can rule out the two 8Cs. It wouldn't be advisable to use an experimental design for the production of a new class when the prototypes had, by 1908, already been superseded. I also think it is fair to assume the 8Gs with their small wheels aren't likely to be the design we're looking for. The choice for me comes down to either the 8 or 8F. With their 6'7" driving wheels, the 8F is more likely, but they were a development of a passenger engine which just so happened to find their niche on fast freights when it was decided that big engines weren't quite the thing yet. The Class 8, meanwhile, was a purpose-built mixed traffic machine, but with their smaller wheels and significantly higher tractive effort than a 3500, they also don't quite hit the mark. If I was to proverbial tube from which objects are propelled by explosive force to my head, set an opinion in stone, or in MP3 I guess, my bet is on the 8F. My reason for thinking so is purely based on the similarities between the 8Fs and 3500s being less off than between the 3500s and the Class 8s. If this rather anticlimactic conclusion is a bit underwhelming for you, I don't feel any less disappointed. I was hoping for this big eureka similarity between the Brabanders and one of the Robinson 460s, but sometimes research just be like that. I do think it is quite the coincidence that another Great Central locomotive class, built 4 years after the 3500s, have the greatest physical resemblance to their Dutch cousins, the Class 1 or Sir Sam Fay engines. So here we are. The inspiration for the 3500 doesn't look anything like it, and the inspiration is only on a surface level. But the successor to that inspiration looks almost exactly like a 3500. Maybe the NBDS was on the right track after all.